Politic. Авторская программа Кирилла Задова, посвященная текущим мировым проблемам. Politic. Предвзятый обзор, субъективные комментарии и искренние оценки Кирилла Задова. С понедельника по четверг с 4 до 5. Politic. Сказал, как обрезал.
Приветствую, друзья, с вами Кирилл Задов, это Politic. Сегодня 12 мая, год 2022, дату уточнил, год 2022, четверг, последний рабочий день для программы Politic. Сегодня мы должны, если все будет нормально со связью, пообщаться с президентом Иерусалимского института стратегии и безопасности профессором Efraim Inbarом и поговорить о израильской безопасности, естественно, в контексте региональном, в контексте внутрикоалиционных вопросов. Там много интересного. Естественно, в контексте косвенно, правда, напрямую не будем этого касаться войны в Украине. В общем, примерно такой план на сегодня. Напоминаю, что вы можете мне писать 347-460-0877. Это смс-портал прямого эфира. Задавать ваши вопросы там. Если вы в прямом эфире меня смотрите, не Филадельфия, application iHeart, application RUSA Radio. Везде в нации. Все остальные, кто смотрит меня на YouTube и подписывается при этом на канал, слушает на SoundCloud, ищите меня в Facebook, Твиттере, задавайте ваши вопросы там или комментируйте на YouTube. Там тоже интеракция возможна и приветствуется всячески.
Politic. Сказал, как обрезал.
We see Professor here on the screen. Professor, how are you? Professor Efraim Inbar is president for Jerusalem Institute of Strategy and Security. Yeah, finally we got the connection. So the first question I want to ask you is like that. Russians are dedicating a lot of resources right now for the Ukrainian events, like for the war in Ukraine. And the prevailing sentiment here in the United States is that because of the huge resources are right now dedicated to the war in Ukraine, then the position as a power broker in Syria, for example, is weakened significantly. Do you agree with this or not?
I think that the regime is strong enough to survive with only a little less help from the Russians. Therefore, the removal of part of the Russian forces from Syria back to Russia and probably to Ukraine is not a significant factor in the survival of the regime in Damascus. And it seems that the Russians have contacted Israel and Iran not to rock the boat in Syria, to allow them to concentrate on Ukraine.
So, in your opinion, that status quo that existed, that Russians were allowing openly or like undercover, like those operations of Israeli air forces in Syria, that status quo will continue to exist?
Correct. Yes, I don't think that the understandings between Israel and Russia have changed.
Yeah, and considering all the conversations lately on Victory Day, on Yom Ha'atzmaut that Putin and Bennett had, and all the apologies that came about, I mean, everything. You think everything's going to be just as it used to be. So the next question I want to ask you about Lebanon. Israel has on the north, directly on the north, a failed state. You agree it's a failed state, basically, because they don't have right now situation, the financial, economical crisis. They have huge military militia that is not under the government control. The government is paralyzed. They cannot do anything. They cannot even get IMF credits because they don't have like agreement and coalition. Coalition process over there in Lebanon is very complex and not working properly, and people are in despair. So, do you think that continuing and deepening the crisis in Lebanon can hurt Israel in the nearest future?
Well, I think that the Hezbollah is strong enough to maintain its hegemonic position in Lebanon. It has the guns, it has the numbers, and the economic situation will obviously affect the country and also Hezbollah. But even if the crisis will deepen and the Lebanese will not be able to sort out their differences to create a more stable environment in their country, still Hezbollah will be the dominant force in Lebanon.
And then, how would you approach that security threat that Hezbollah presents to Israel at that stage already? Because we are deep in, they have a lot of missiles. We know that they are in a position of attacking any point, any target in Israel, even in the deep south. They can do because they have missiles that can reach that far. And they are they know how to fight a war because they were training themselves in Syria. They almost won a war for Assad on the ground. And they're very professional fighters. And Israel already had a couple of experiences with Hezbollah. They're not clearly in Israeli favor. I mean, I cannot call a victory war of 2006, Second Lebanon War. So what do you think is the best approach from Israeli side?
In my view, probably the best approach is a preemptive war against Hezbollah in Lebanon.
When?
We cannot. Well, I don't know if I can give an order to do it today.
I understand.
Or tomorrow. But I think that it is rather urgent because if we do not attack strongly the Iranian proxies, I'm not sure that the Abraham Accords will survive. Basically, the Arab countries that joined the Abraham Accords and made agreements with Israel, public agreements, they came primarily because they saw Israel as the only force that can withstand the Iranian attempts to attain hegemony in the Middle East, particularly when we see that the Americans are getting away from the Middle East. They have their own reasons. They don't need so much Middle East oil, and they see China as their main challenge, not Iran. And therefore, they are moving away from the Middle East. I don't think they will, eliminate all their presence, but still they'll put much less weight on what's happening in the Middle East and will move some of their military presence from this area. Therefore, if Israel doesn't deliver and really doesn't make a dent in the Iranian strategy to gain hegemony in the Middle East, then I'm not sure that those countries will continue the good relations they have with Israel.
I wanted to ask you that later, but because you brought the topic of Abraham Accords to the picture, do you think that, I know that's messing up all the thing, but listen, if Israel will have to conduct like Gaza operation or right now in Yehuda Shomron operation like it's going on now, and it's going to go deeper and more Palestinians going to get killed. Already we had some kind of a diplomatic call from Emirates of Israeli ambassador to Al-Aqsa violence and all the things, you know what I'm talking about, like all the mess caused by Hamas by declaration like for all Arabs in Yehuda Shomron and then Galilee and Israeli citizen of Arabic descent that they should fight Israelis everywhere they can find them. Provocations like that, and Israel going to fight, and more Arabs going to get killed. And then, don't you think that can be a big reason for Abraham Accords to like dissolve?
I think that we indeed face a multi-arena threat, which is orchestrated by Iranians. And one way to address it is, of course, to strike on Lebanon. And we have to make sure that the Judea and Samaria is quiet and it's not a base for terrorism against Israel. And we have also invest resources in making sure that the internal threat, the Arabs in Israel, will not materialize. Yeah, Israel has a tall order in its security challenges.
That understood. No, I'm asking if we'll have to continue to fight with the Arab threat and to offset Arab threat right now with all means we have, like do incursions into Area A and go to Temple Mount for compound to like with police presence, heavy police presence on Temple Mount. That's gonna cause problems with our Arab allies, like with Emirates, with Jordan, with even today, like Moroccan politicians said no to meet to Israeli officials because of that accidental killing of Al Jazeera journalist. You know what I'm talking about. So, considering all the factors that we have to do right now, a lot of things in to offset the Hamas threat in Yehuda v'Shomron, don't you think that Abraham Accord can suffer?
The Abraham Accords will not suffer by our operations in Judea and Samaria and by our police actions within sovereign Israel. So what they want to see is the Arab states is actions against Iran or Iranian proxies. And this is what's important to them. The Arabs, indeed are sensitive to the Temple Mount, but we should not always relate great importance to statements of politicians. Sometimes they just pay lip service for a certain cause, and they act in a different way.
So they gotta calm down.
Most of the Arab world doesn't care about Palestinians.
True, but they gotta talk to their constituency, to their electorate, and they have to talk to them, and they gotta show them that they are concerned with Temple Mount, and they have the ability at least to reprimand Israel when, in opinion of the populace, it needs to be reprimanded, right? So we shouldn't pay attention. In other words, we shouldn't give a lot of weight to what they say for domestic consumption. For the internal audience, we have to watch what they do in the international arena, right? That's what you're basically saying.
Yes, and after all, they don't have a constituency. We should forget that those states are not democratic, but autocratic, and basically the elite makes decisions with
except for Jordan,
not much concern for what the people think.
Right. That understood.
Also, we have to be honest that in the case of the Emirates and Bahrain and even Morocco, a part of the population favors closer interactions with Israel. A large part.
Right, but the certain part of the population doesn't. And if you look at the Jordan, which have a big chunk of the population are Palestinians, they are not very happy with those relations that's already in place, even considering that they're not right now in the best place. I mean, Israeli-Jordanian relations. And King Abdullah should always look into preserving internal peace also. I wouldn't call whatever right now the regime in Jordan is an absolute monarchy. It's somehow not that absolute anymore, because they are, after start of Arab Spring, they're more attentive to domestic audience, I think. So we have to watch that development also. And also, Abdullah is Shomer is his guardian of Temple Mount because of he's a king of Jordan. So how our relations with Jordan can be maintained when we conduct our security operations? What do you think? What's the best policy towards Jordan?
Well, first of all, I think that the relationship between Israel and Jordan is a complex one. And we definitely see the importance of Jordan as a buffer state for our security. It has the longest border with Israel, from which we have no terrorist attacks. So Jordan, as it behaves now, in a moderate way, has great value for Israel's security. We should also remember that Jordan has a rich history of dealing with Palestinian opposition, and usually they had the upper hand. So King Abdullah is not so weak as we tend to think. He has a strong apparatus, security apparatus. He can deal with some of the challenges that come from the opposition. And at the same time, we should make clear to him that certain statements on part of his prime minister or other governmental figures are totally unacceptable. We should also emphasize that Jordan is dependent on Israel, on gas, on water, and we should make sure that they do not misbehave.
That's cool. So we have certain leverage over Jordan. That's what you're basically saying. I got it.
Yes, we have a leverage.
Right. Okay. Little further from Israel, but I think more important than those are on the borders. What do you think a prospect of signing Iranian deal right now, which is stalled according to all media that I'm currently reading? It's not going forward. What do you think are chances the deal going to be signed?
I have certain belief that Iran will not miss the opportunity to get a deal that will legitimize its nuclear program, that will allow it to continue to cheat in order to progress on its program, on its nuclear program. And therefore, I believe that eventually they'll do everything in order that the deal will be signed. They are bargaining, that the Iranians are very good at bargaining. But eventually, I think that a deal will be signed, and I'm not sure that this is a good development for Israel and for the West.
Then, if it's going to be signed, a huge chunk of money going to be released from frozen Iranian assets, and those money going to go to Hamas, as I understand, and Hamas and Hezbollah and Houthis in South and in Yemen. So it's going to be like a new assertive Iranian power with selling resources. So it's going to be a big threat for Abraham Accords countries, right?
What you mentioned basically is another reason not to miss a deal. And part of the money will definitely go to the proxies, but part of the money will go also to the pockets of the elite. And some of it will be siphoned to the people.
Right.
But we are talking about over $100 billion. So this is a lot of money that you can spread it, in many ways.
Right. So what's the best course of action for Israel to offset that threat, in your opinion? I understand that it's a big question, but what do you think would be a right thing to do right now?
I think, first of all, we should hit the proxies as strongly as possible and prepare for dealing with the Iranian nuclear threat. It seems that Israel is not prepared at this moment. And we should make sure that our military will be ready within a short time.
Do you think our Israeli civil infrastructure is prepared to do mass evacuations like on a normal scale? Because it's going to be retaliation, obviously. Either from Iran, it's probably from Iranian themselves, and from Hezbollah on the north, probably. It's a speculation, I understand, but probably that's what's going to happen. So do you think Israeli infrastructure is prepared for that kind of events?
The Israeli infrastructure is definitely dependent by several layers of anti-missile systems. We have the Iron Dome for short range. We have Sling of David for interim. And then we have Arrow 3 and Arrow 4. So I think the infrastructure will be defended. The problem is not, or less of a problem, more of a problem is the population.
That's what I'm saying, right.
The population will be less defended because we'll have to defend our critical infrastructure, the power stations, the ports, the desalination plants, airfields, airports. So the critical infrastructure will be defended at the expense of the population. And the things that the population understands. The conflict with Iran entails some suffering on its part.
I see. We're going to come back right after short commercial break, and we continue, God willing, and discuss then the elephant in the room, Gaza. So please stay with us.
Бутик-политик. Сказал, как обрезал.
Друзья, добро пожаловать в Бутик-политик. Очень короткая вторая часть, потому что, к сожалению, связь у нас еще раз пропала с профессором Efraim Inbarом. Я потом лично отдельно свяжусь с профессором, и мы договоримся в следующий раз, когда мы сможем это продолжить, потому что, уже сейчас, к сожалению, фактически не остается для этого времени. Осталось за кадром главный вопрос — это Газа, потому как это слон, да, elephant in the room, как тут принято говорить, потому что наличие... Вы слышали, что подход профессора, он реалистский, на самом деле, подход из... силков реализма деться некуда, да, потому что этот подход, он определяет безопасность как самое главное, что есть, о чем нужно думать, в какой парадигме надо находиться, поэтому понятно, что в случае с Газой, если профессор говорит перед этим, вкратце напомню, о том, что правильные действия по отношению к Хизбалле — это preemptive strike, да, то есть упреждающий удар, который нужно нанести, да, мы это слышали от него сегодня, наконец-то впервые мы этого вопроса коснулись, в предыдущей нашей беседе у нас не получилось, здесь мы слышим подобную вещь, значит, понятно, что по отношению к Газе позиция, по идее, должна быть в логике такой же, да, то есть нужно заходить и зачищать. И это сталкивается с огромным количеством проблем, и вот как раз относительно того, что же делать непосредственно, как решать вопрос больших потерь, которые могут возникнуть, да, как этого не допустить, при том, чтобы цель в обеспечении безопасности была достигнута, это эти вопросы я хотел задать, но, к сожалению, связь у нас прервалась, и уже не имеет сейчас возможности, нет физической у меня возможности сейчас восстанавливать ее просто по причине нехватки времени. Но мы обязательно к этому вопросу вернемся. Единственное, что хотела сказать отдельно, вот этот момент, который вы услышали, что да, в отношении Ирана правильно было бы наносить удары по прокси, наносить удары по непосредственно ядерной инфраструктуре, которая непосредственно занимается обогащением, да. Инфраструктура израильская — это защищена, то, что я вам все время говорю, что это не вопрос, да, что есть разные уровни противоракетных систем, есть железный купол, который малой дальности, да, ракеты сбивает, есть HETS, да, есть Arrow система, которая сбивает более продвинутые ракеты. Есть разные системы, все разных уровней. Для разных ракет разные системы, поэтому критическая инфраструктура будет защищена, а вот огромные кластеры, да, огромные хабы израильского населения, такие как, например, Тель-Авив, который там более миллиона человек проживает, в Большом Тель-Авиве, да, все вместе, Рамат-Ган, да, например, то есть все вот это вот, простите, Гуш-Дан, да, вот это все огромный кластер населения, он остается в итоге, он значительно менее защищен, потому что тут придется заниматься эвакуацией, достаточно короткие сроки, и это достаточно сомнительное такое предприятие. Вот тут наступают моменты, о которых надо думать прежде всего, на мой взгляд. Ну вот видите, тут я говорил вам об этом раньше тоже. Вот примерно, друзья, я надеюсь, что мы поговорили, с нами был профессор, что поговорили мы достаточно, по крайней мере, мы какие-то вопросы смогли закрыть, несмотря на проблемы с связью, которые у нас были. С нами был профессор Efraim Inbar, он президент Иерусалимского института стратегии и безопасности. Я надеюсь, что в какой-то обозримой перспективе снова нам удастся с ним поговорить. Друзья, большое спасибо, что были со мной. С вами был Кирилл Задов, вы слушали Бутик-политик. До встречи в понедельник, вам хороших выходных.
Бутик-политик. Сказал, как обрезал.